There is a place where every door stays unlocked all night, and no one ever steals, because all 222 people on the island are related to each other. It sits alone in the South Atlantic, so far from anywhere that the supply ship from Cape Town takes 6 days to reach it, longer than Apollo 11 took to reach the moon. No airport, no cash machine, no mobile signal, and yet the lobster caught off these rocks ends up on tables in New York. This is Tristan da Cunha, the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. But the strangest part is not how far away it is. The strangest part is this. These people were shown the whole modern world, and they looked at it, and they said no. So the real question is not how they survive out here. The question is what a community actually lives on, when it has almost nothing the rest of us think we need. Open a map of the world and look at the empty stretch of ocean between South Africa and South America. You will not find Tristan da Cunha there. It is too small to print. The nearest inhabited land is the island of St. Helena, more than 1,500 miles away, about 2,400 kilometers. The coast of Africa is farther still. All around it there is nothing but open water and wind. The island itself is smaller than most cities, a single volcano rising straight out of the sea. And here is the first thing that shapes everything else. There is no airport, and there never can be one. The land is too steep, too broken, too surrounded by cliffs. A runway simply has nowhere to go, so the only way in is by sea, and the sea does not make it easy. A handful of ships call here, and only a few times a year. The crossing from Cape Town takes about 6 days in each direction, and there are only a few passenger seats on board. If you miss the ship, you wait months for the next one. If a storm rolls in, the ship can be delayed for weeks or turned back without ever unloading. There have been times when a vessel reached the island but could not put a single crate ashore because the swell was too violent to launch the small boats. Time here is not measured in hours, it is measured in ship arrivals. And you cannot simply decide to go. This is the part that surprises people the most. Tristan is not a place you visit on a whim. Outsiders have to ask the island's own council for permission to come at all, and even then, you cannot buy land and you cannot build a house. A billionaire has no more right to a square foot of this island than a stranger with empty pockets. In practice, there are only 3 ways onto Tristan for good: be born here, be invited by the community, or marry someone who already belongs. Everyone else stays on the far side of the water. That isolation is so complete that for long stretches of history, the outside world simply forgot to tell them things. Word of the First World War and of the Great Flu that killed millions only reached the island after both had already come and gone. News did not travel here. It washed up, late, whenever the next ship happened to arrive. So the distance is not just a fact about the map. The distance is the author of the whole story. The reason the community is what it is, the reason it survives the way it does, and the reason it now faces the danger it does. But if it is this hard to reach and this hard to join, then where did these people even come from in the first place? From a distance, Tristan looks like a single mountain that decided to stand up in the middle of the ocean, and that is almost exactly what it is. At its center rises Queen Mary's Peak, a volcanic summit reaching about 6,760 feet, a little over 2,000 meters. That makes it the highest point on any inhabited land Britain still holds, taller than any mountain in England, Scotland, or Wales. But the strangest thing about the peak is what sits at the top of it. Inside the crater, in a bowl of rock several hundred feet wide, there is a small lake, and in winter, When the summit fills with snow and the water freezes over, that lake takes on a shape people find hard to believe until they see it. A heart of ice, resting at the very top of the loneliest island on Earth. Almost no one has ever stood beside it, because almost no one ever climbs that high. Ring the whole island and you find the reason so few people ever set foot inland. The coast is guarded by cliffs that drop straight into the sea, sheer walls of rock as much as 2,000 feet tall, taller than the Eiffel Tower, running for miles along the shore. There is only one place on the entire island flat enough to build on. One patch of level ground wedged between the mountain and the ocean. That is why, after 200 years of human life here, there is still only one village. The people are pressed onto a thin shelf of land, with the volcano at their back and the whole Atlantic in front of them. That single shelf holds almost the entire human world of Tristan. Beyond it, there is only cliff, ocean, and wind. The village that sits on it even has a name that sounds far grander than the place looks: Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, the most remote settlement of its kind anywhere on Earth. Everything a person needs to live is squeezed into that one strip of flat ground, and everything they cannot have is written in the rock walls around it. The island did not choose to keep its people in one small place. The land made that choice for them, long before anyone arrived. And if you want to see it for yourself, you can. This place, so far from everything, has actually been mapped by Google Street View. You can move along its one road from your own sofa, past the little houses and the sea beyond them. A community almost no one will ever visit, quietly open to anyone with a screen. That beauty is what feeds and shelters this community. But where did the community itself come from? And what did it cost them to hold on to a place this remote? Every single person living on Tristan today descends from a tiny handful of people who arrived across the 1800s and early 1900s. The exact number depends on how you count. Around 15 settlers put down roots in the earliest years, while genetic studies tracing the family tree point to roughly 28 ancestors in total. Either way, the founding group was astonishingly small. The first to stay was a Scottish corporal named William Glass, who remained behind in 1817 when the British garrison sailed away. He brought a wife from Cape Town, Maria, a teenager of mixed African descent. On a bare island with no doctor and no midwife, she raised a family of 16 children. A large share of the island today can trace a line straight back to her. But a settlement of men could not become a community on its own, and by the 1820s, Tristan had a problem that threatened to end it before it began. There were men and almost no women. The solution was extraordinary. A ship's captain sailed to St. Helena and persuaded 5 women of color to cross the ocean and marry 5 men they had never met. They arrived having never seen their husbands, never seen the island, with no way to return. It was, in effect, one of the earliest arranged marriages by sea in recorded history, and it meant that from its very first generation, this British island was never simply English. It was mixed from the start. You can still feel that history in the people who trace their roots back here. Some descendants, scattered later across South Africa, discovered only decades on that their great-grandmothers had been freed slaves of Malay and African origin, married into the island's founding families. For years, under South Africa's old racial laws, that mixed heritage was something to hide rather than celebrate, and whole branches of these families lost track of one another. Only much later did some of them find their way back together and piece the shared story into place. The result of all this is a community with only 7 surnames shared among everyone. So many people carry the same name that a first name alone means nothing. You are known by your name, plus your father's name, plus a nickname, just so the village can tell you apart. Ask for one man by name and you might be pointed toward 5 different people. In most of the world, A surname is how you stand apart from the crowd. Here, there is barely a crowd to stand apart from, and the names have folded in on themselves until almost everyone shares one. And that closeness carries a cost that no agreement could ever share out evenly. 200 years built on so few founders leaves everyone, at minimum, as closely related as first cousins. Geneticists who studied the island measured exactly that. It shows up in people's health. Around a third of islanders live with asthma, with signs of it in more than half, one of the highest rates recorded anywhere, and the trail leads straight back to the founding couple who are thought to have carried it. When a whole people begins with a handful of ancestors, the health of those first few becomes the fate of everyone who follows. It is a beautiful story of survival against the odds, but it was never a fairy tale, and the price is written into the body itself. Nowhere is that weight felt more clearly than in the lives of the island's women. The story of Tristan does not really begin with William Glass. It begins with the women who agreed to cross an ocean for him and for men like him. Without those 5 women who sailed from St. Helena in the 1820s, married strangers and raised the first families, there would be no community here at all. No next generation, no island as anyone knows it. Every woman born on Tristan today can trace her line straight back to that small group of founding mothers. They left no statues and no holiday behind them, but they are the reason the place exists. And in the 2 centuries since, the women of Tristan have carried far more of the community than the outside world ever noticed. On an island with no money and no market, the work that keeps people alive is not the work that shows up in any economy. It is the growing of potatoes in the shared patches, the raising of children in a place with one small school, the knitting and mending that clothe a family against the cold Atlantic wind. Much of that has always rested on the women, quietly, year after year. Even courtship here has its own gentle language, and the women set its pace. In the old days, people on Tristan were not given to grand speeches about love. They showed it by making things. A young man might come and sit in a family's kitchen without ever saying why he had come, and everyone understood exactly what it meant. If a young woman felt the same, she would knit him a pair of socks, and the number of stripes she chose said what words did not. A stripe or 2 meant friendship. More meant something closer to a promise. In a world that now swipes through strangers in seconds, here a courtship could move at the speed of wool and patience, one careful row at a time. But it would be dishonest to paint only the warm picture. For all the strength these women carry, their world has always been narrow in ways that are hard to soften. On an island of a couple of hundred relatives, a young woman who falls in love with a cousin, because there is simply no one else. The same closeness that removes crime and greed also removes choice from the most personal corner of a life. And today, the women of Tristan face the sharpest version of that bind, a decision we will come back to at the very end. Stay, in the only place that has ever been home, or leave it, perhaps for good. Their answer, more than anyone's, will decide whether this island has a future. But first, how does a community like this hold together at all, with no money, no police, and no one in charge? The answer was written down in 1817 on a single page by William Glass and 2 stonemasons who stayed with him. They called it the Firm. It was a plain, voluntary agreement about how they would live together, and its rules were simple. The stock and stores of every kind would be shared equally, profit would be divided equally, and, in the words of the document itself, no member would assume any superiority whatever, but all would be considered equal in every respect. Think about what that means. There was no money on the island, no written law beyond that page, no police, no court, and no one in charge. And it held. For well over a century, Tristan ran on shared land, shared livestock, and fish divided evenly among everyone, with almost no serious conflict and no crime worth the name. A Norwegian sociologist named Peter Munch came to study the island and later built much of his life's work on it, describing a society that had governed itself for generations by nothing more than the voluntary consent of equals. He was so struck by what he found that he gave one of his books a telling title, A Study of Crisis in what he saw as a kind of utopia. Here was an unknown community in the middle of the ocean that had written its own version of a shared communal life out of pure survival, decades before Karl Marx put such ideas into a book. It was not a theory anyone had argued for. It was simply what a handful of people did when they had nothing but each other and had to make it work. And yet this is exactly where honesty matters most, because this is the part people most want to argue about. It is easy to hold Tristan up as proof that humans do not need money or hierarchy to live in peace. But look closer, and the picture is two-sided. A system like this works because the group is tiny, because everyone is known, and because no one can hide or slip away. Scale it up, and it strains. The same closeness that removes greed also removes the exit. There is nowhere to go, no way to start over, no anonymity to escape into. So here is a fair question to sit with and to leave in the comments. Is a place like this a glimpse of something better, or a trap that only looks like freedom? That balance held for 130 years, and then, one night in 1961, it very nearly ended. In October 1961, a volcano everyone had believed was dead came back to life, and it woke up right beside the village. The ground trembled. Rocks slid down the slopes behind the houses. Then a crack opened in the earth between the settlement and the island's small factory, and the choice became simple: leave or die. In a single night, every man, woman, and child was moved off the island, first to a neighboring rock and then onto a ship bound for England. Not one life was lost, but the entire community had lost its home in a matter of hours. For most of them, England was the first place they had ever seen beyond their island. They were housed together on an old Air Force base, and the outside world treated them like a curiosity. Photographed on their first bus ride, their first look at a shop full of goods, their first television. But the truth was harder than the newspapers made it seem. Some of the women were given jobs in a shop and struggled because their whole lives had run on the rhythm of tides and seasons rather than the clock. If one could not come in, a relative might simply turn up in her place. When there were no customers, they saw no reason to stay. The idea of clocking in and clocking out, of time measured in minutes owed to an employer, made little sense to people who had always measured time in ships and seasons. The English winter was cruel to them in other ways. With no immunity to ordinary English illnesses, several of the older islanders fell sick, and some did not survive it. The government of the day even doubted the island would ever be fit to live on again, and would have been content to keep them in Britain for good. But when a reporter asked one woman what ideas she was taking back home from the modern world, her answer was quietly devastating: none. They had brought nothing back with them because they had found nothing there they wanted, because they went back. In 1963, given the choice between a comfortable life in a wealthy country and a volcanic rock at the end of the earth, around 200 of them chose the rock. That word, chose, is the heart of this whole story. And it was not unanimous. A few families stayed behind in England for good, built new lives there, and never returned. And to this day, people wonder whether they ever regretted it, one way or the other. But the great majority went home, back to the unlocked doors and the shared fields, and the cousins they had known all their lives. So what is that life actually built on? What does a community of 200 people at the end of the world do to keep itself alive? The whole economy of Tristan balances on the back of a single creature, a lobster. The Tristan rock lobster lives only in the waters around this one small group of islands, and it has become the island's lifeline. It is certified as sustainable seafood, and it travels far, carried by a single South African firm that holds the sole rights to the catch, onto the menus of expensive restaurants in New York, in Japan, in Australia, and across Europe. This one animal accounts for roughly 80% of everything the island earns. That is a remarkable thing for a couple of hundred people to have built. There is even a version sold nowhere else on Earth, a whole lobster certified clean enough to be eaten raw. And yet the number of people who actually hold a permanent job at the packing plant can be counted on two hands. A tiny fleet of small boats, a modest factory built to European standards, and one species, that is the entire foundation. It was not always lobster that held the place up. During the Second World War, when a small naval station was set up here, the island had no real currency at all, and for a time potatoes did the job that money does everywhere else. People were paid for their labor in goods and traded in the one crop the land could reliably grow. That says something about how thin the margin has always been out here. A community that once counted its wealth in sacks of potatoes now sells one of the most sought-after luxury foods in the world, but it still rests everything on a single thread, which is exactly where the pride turns into fear. This is at once the most premium and the most fragile economy imaginable. Everything the island buys from the outside world is paid for, in the end, by that lobster. If disease struck the population for even a single season, if the catch failed, there is no second industry to fall back on. A whole community's future rides on the health of one animal in the cold water around them, and that dependence on the sea helps explain their next decision, one that sounds almost unbelievable for a place that lives off fishing. In 2021, this community of around 200 people did something that most of the world's richest nations have never managed. They took the vast stretch of ocean around their islands, an area of roughly 687,000 square kilometers, hundreds of thousands of square miles, and closed most of it off. Around 90% of their waters became a no-take zone, where fishing, mining, and drilling are simply not allowed. It stands today as one of the largest marine sanctuaries on the planet, and the largest in the Atlantic. And this is a community that lives off the sea. They rely on that lobster for 4 out of every 5 pounds they earn, and still they chose to lock away the ocean that feeds them, to protect it for the long run rather than strip it for the short one. In 2024, that decision earned them an International Conservation Award, placing this remote island among a small group of the best protected ocean places on Earth. Their waters shelter kelp forests, deep seamounts, cold water corals, and endangered penguins found almost nowhere else. There is a quiet lesson in that. The people so often described as poor in choices, stuck on a rock with nothing, turned out to be among the great guardians of the ocean, protecting more sea than nations 1,000 times their size. And it fits the way they have always lived. A community that shares its land, its livestock, and its catch was never going to treat the ocean as something to be emptied for quick profit. Protecting the sea for the long run is simply the same instinct that built the firm back in 1817, carried out to the water's edge. They locked the ocean away to secure their future. But even as they did, a very different force was arriving on the island, one that no marine sanctuary could keep out. In September 2024, the modern world finally landed on Tristan da Cunha, not by ship, but by satellite. The island switched on Starlink, and its internet speed leapt from a crawl of around 10 megabits per second to as much as 290 broadband as fast as a mainland city. The old slow connection did not vanish. It became the backup, held in reserve in case the new link ever fails. But for the first time, A doctor here could send medical data to a specialist overseas in real time and get help during an emergency without waiting for a ship. For the first time in years, some islanders could see the faces of distant friends and family live on a screen. In a place that once learned about world wars months too late, the outside world now arrives instantly. And that is the twist this whole story has been building toward. Because the greatest threat to Tristan was never the volcano, and it was never the isolation. It is this. Look at the numbers. The population has fallen from nearly 300 people in the late 1980s to around 222 today. That is a loss of roughly a quarter in a single lifetime. And the cause is not disaster. It is the wider world becoming visible and reachable and hard to resist. The island's brightest young people are sent away to Britain or South Africa to study, and more of them do not come back. So it comes down to a young woman, 18 years old, standing on that thin shelf of land between the mountain and the sea. She has two futures. She can stay, marry within the only community she has ever known, and spend her life on a few square miles of rock. Or she can leave, study far away, fall in love with a stranger, and perhaps never return. For most of the island's history, staying was simply what you did. Now, every year, more of them choose to go, and the door that opened to let the world in is the same door that lets them out. That is the real lesson of Tristan da Cunha. A community does not survive because of its resources, or its location, or even its rules. This one survived because, every single day for 200 years, its people chose one another, chose to belong, to share, to stay. Every layer of this place has two sides. The peace has a price. The isolation has a price. And now the connection they longed for has a price too. No one knows whether the next generation will keep choosing this island the way their grandparents did. But you know it exists now. These few hundred people at the end of the earth, living a way of life almost gone from the world. If a story about a place this small and this far away can still reach you, then somewhere out there, other forgotten places are waiting to be seen too.